Welcome to Diasporaa, the show where we share the remarkable stories of immigrants from the Indian subcontinent. I'm your host, Aditya, and each week we sit down with individuals who have made the journey over and explore their experiences, their challenges, their triumphs. We delve into their unique perspectives on adapting to a new culture while staying connected to their roots. Our guest for today is Ashwin Gonibeed. Originally from Bangalore or Bengaluru, he grew up in Chennai before coming to Florida for his master's degree. He's had a long career with T-Mobile, and that took him to many parts of the US, and eventually got an MBA from Wharton and joined a SaaS company. And most recently has taken a dive into entrepreneurship with his company, Terra Casa. So lots to unpack here. Ashwin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Adi. Glad to be here.
Of course. My first question, you have a last name that I have not heard before. So tell us more about where the last name comes from and what type of last name it is and whether it has a meaning attached to it.
Yeah. So Gonibeed is the name of a small village in northwest Karnataka. And that's where my father's side of the family is from. And so, in my parents' generation itself, they had all sort of moved out from Gonibeed and kind of moved on to do different things. But that's the origin of the name. It's I think I looked it up. There's a population of 3,000 now, so like super small. but anyone from Gonibeed probably has some kind of a connection if you go back like a couple of steps.
Yeah.
That's probably
So it's a locational last name.
That's right.
My listeners know that it could be caste based, it could be occupational, like Mehta means accountant, for example. So thank you for sharing that. You're from Karnataka, but you moved to Tamil Nadu at a younger age. And by now, our listeners know that India is like Europe, where each state is like its own country with its own language, food, culture, movies, and temperaments and nuances. Did that feel like you're an outsider when you were in Tamil Nadu? Because, as a Gujarati in Maharashtra, it's not that obvious because there used to be one state. So there's a lot of people from each state in the other. Is that the case with Karnataka and Tamil Nadu? Or was it more like an outsider equation?
Yeah, when we moved, I was in second grade. And at that point, the cross-pollination between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu was not as much as it is today. Especially in Bangalore now, being sort of the hub of technology that it is, you find people from many parts of the country coming in Bangalore. And in Chennai, not so much at that time. And we'd actually moved because my father at that time was setting up a company of his, not my father, my father was setting up a company of his own. And Tamil Nadu just had like greater opportunities for entrepreneurs at that time. So we had moved as a family when I was in second grade. And the entry was actually, as I think about it, it was pretty normal. I mean, at that young age, when you're going to CBSE schools, you're talking English mostly in the school.
Yeah.
And you pick up friends along the way. But no, the entry was actually quite, not easy, but it was normal, so to speak.
Right. Did you end up picking up Tamil at all and being fluent in it, or did you just not need to?
I did. Actually, my Tamil is I'm more fluent in Tamil than I am in Kannada, my native language, right? Understandably, because we spoke Kannada at home and then Tamil everywhere else growing up.
Yeah.
And, it's funny, I'd actually come back to Bangalore where extended families of ours, both on my dad's side and my mom's side, lived at that time, and there's quite a few of them still here in Bangalore. And I'd always come back picking up like colloquial phrases from Bangalore. Most of them, for kids especially, they're more like, rough phrases, so to speak. And my mom was always surprised. Every time I came back from summer vacation in Bangalore, I have like this wide vocabulary in Kannada. It wasn't pleasant to the ears. And then it would kind of die down till the next summer vacation and so on. But,
yeah, my son does that with Gujarati. So every time he goes to Bombay and he picks up Gujarati, but my father-in-law has a Kathiawadi accent. Kathiawar is a part of Gujarat near where Bhavnagar is and Rajkot is. So he speaks not only Gujarati with the Kathiawadi accent, even his English becomes Kathiawadi. And it's a mix of, American English and Kathiawadi English, and it's quite a sight to see or to listen to. Yeah, I get what you're saying about the two languages. In Bombay, we have an ongoing debate even 30 years later. Is it Bombay or is it Mumbai? So is that the case with Bangalore? Like, are there people who steadfastly refuse to call it Bengaluru and still call it Bangalore? Or are people just kind of, accepted it?
So for me, I think it's more Madras and Chennai.
Yeah.
And versus Bangalore and Bengaluru. I think my attachment is, I have historical roots to Bangalore. I was born here, but I grew up in Chennai. So I have,
Right.
I think I have historical roots in Bangalore, but my attachment is a lot to Chennai. I know the city better. I grew up there. I have lots of core memories
Sure.
in Chennai. And even now I call it Chennai, but when I think about it as Madras in
Yeah.
those days. And lots of like core childhood memories from Madras, Chennai at that point. And I think one of them primarily being like growing up in an apartment complex. I don't know if you've had that experience, but as a kid, it was pretty
In
normal.
Bombay, that's all we have. There's no space.
Right.
Nobody has their own house, like a single family home or a townhouse or anything. Everybody lives in condos.
In condos, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember growing up in Chennai as well in this complex called Blue Diamond Apartments. I don't think it's there anymore. I have to go check out the area. But yeah, it was like this multi-story building. It was pretty common for my mother not to know where I was at any given point during the evenings or the afternoons, and I'd always be running around somewhere in the complex. So
The instructions were don't leave the compound. You can go anywhere, but don't go out on the street.
Yeah, and there was always a watchman that kept an eye over the kids and make sure no one left or came back in. And so within that area, anything was pretty kosher. So
yeah, that's interesting. So you did all your schooling in Chennai, and then what motivated you to look to the US for further education?
Yeah, so gosh, this is 25 years ago, 24 years ago. It's been a while. And at that time when I was graduating, for those that could afford the journey and make the journey, coming to the US was this logical next step after you did engineering and so on to get from your bachelor's degree. So I got my bachelor's in engineering in Chennai itself. And that was interesting, kind of commuting to and forth college while you're staying at home. And then it was like the logical next step, coming to the US to get a master's degree. And so that's sort of what I did. And there was a lot more opportunities at that time, taking that journey, I think.
Yeah.
Today, the world's a lot more collapsed, I think.
And in Florida, where did you study and what did you study there?
So I went to the University of Central Florida in Orlando. And it's funny, I have this really interesting picture in my mind of coming to the US for the first time. I flew into DC first, and my cousin who was in DC, picked me up from the airport. I stayed over at his place. And for whatever reason, I remember eating Papa John's pizza for dinner the first time. And, that's when I was introduced to like the little jalapeno pepper and the garlic sauce and stuff like that coming Papa John's. It's the kind of thing you remember. And the next thing I remember from that was catching a flight from DC going to Orlando. And for those your listeners that are familiar with Orlando, it's Disneyland is what people go for. Yeah. So in the flight, I was the only kid wearing, within like an engineering textbook and studying, and around me was everybody else going to Disneyland and like the Hawaiian shirts and kids running up and down. And I remember just looking around going, am I making the right decision here going to Orlando? But UCF was just it was so much fun. Lots of interesting experiences as, first time expats do, and first time visitors do.
Couple of anecdotes to share. I have with these cities where there's a lot of tourism, the lived experience of someone who lives there is so different from the tourist aspect. I have one of my early guests, Vikram, studied in Las Vegas for his master's, and he said, I never went to the Strip ever. Like it was, it could have been any other city or any other college town for all I cared. The second one is that this, knowing that where you're going, what to expect. I've had cases in India of students who, until they landed, they thought they were going to Pittsburgh State University. And upon landing, they found out it was Pittsburgh, Kansas, and not Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so I've heard those kinds of stories too. So at least you knew where you were going. And I look at all of these colleges from the frame of college football teams, because I went to UT Austin for my undergrad. So I got 4 years at a younger age and lots of immersion into college sports and all of those things. So I don't judge colleges by their academics at all. I only judge them by their football teams. And this year we had a shock loss to Florida. So, I forgive you as being someone who studied in Florida for doing that to my college team. I talk smack about everyone's colleges. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were... Gosh, I don't follow college football as closely, but when I was there, Dante Culpepper had just made the transition from UCF to, I think it was the Minnesota Vikings, so that was like a big talk in the town. But the Gators always from University of Florida always, got the limelight more than we did, or
Yeah.
FSU, and
Yeah.
so then UCF did at that point, right?
Yeah, and these rivalries are intense. I always try to compare it to like a India-Pakistan rivalry,
Yeah.
and it's obviously there's a lot more history and pain between India and Pakistan and their shared history, and it's 600 million people watching even a regular game. But the rivalries here, especially between colleges, are 100-year rivalries or 110 to 120 years old. They have so much tradition between them. So in its own way, these rivalries are pretty amazing to observe and follow and be a part of.
Yeah.
How was the approach to studying engineering different in your master's here versus your bachelor's in India?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the education system itself is quite different, right? As you're well aware, and so a lot more methodical structure on exams and tests and stuff like that in your bachelor's degree growing up here in India, versus the masters. You have a lot more freedom to explore. And so I think that was a little not daunting to kind of navigate, but it was I want to say it was almost a little uncomfortable to navigate because you're not used to the system.
Yeah.
So it takes a little
Yeah.
while to figure out what do you want to study, why, where you headed.
Yeah.
And that's where the community, I think, helped a lot, and the professors helped a lot in kind of guiding you through the
Yeah.
process and so
Yeah,
on.
I majored in marketing but minored in urban planning. And those kinds of combinations are practically impossible in India to do.
Right.
They don't even have those departments in the commerce stream or So
Right.
I had a friend who was doing petroleum engineering and he minored in Greek mythology at the same time. And he did it only because he could, not because he was genuinely interested in Greek mythology.
My experience of it was now, if with the hindsight of experience, if I was to go back, I wonder if I would have made more choices like that, like follow things that are outside the normal track, but that
Yeah.
really that pick your interest. I think we all, certainly me, within the boundary of the experience and the exposure that I had at that time, right, chose sort of one of a smaller subset of experiences or studies to so focused on engineering and so on. But that's such a wonderful and such a wide range of experiences to get.
Yeah, exactly. What did you do right out of college? Did you join T-Mobile right away, or was there something else in between?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The way I landed in UCF was through the help of a friend, actually. A friend of mine that I'd studied bachelor's with, he landed up in UCF and to finish his final 2 years in bachelor's. And he was the one that sort of guided me along the way to come to UCF. And, my experience in UCF was, again, within that sort of cocooned Indian community, I think, people that were super helpful, people that had made the journey before, that guided you in what to do and so on. And so my journey to get my first internship was also guided by that same process. It was someone that I'd met at one of the alums. Well, he wasn't an alum yet. He was still studying at that time. He was a year ahead of me. And he helped guide me to get my first internship to the point where, and this was at a company called Sprint at that time, which I'm sure some of you listeners are familiar with. And to the extent that he told me he kind of guided me how to get an internship, coached me on the internship process the night before the interview. And I got my first internship at Sprint. I was there for a little while. And then through a bunch of circumstances, that internship ended. And my next internship was at T-Mobile, which was because I was an intern at Sprint. I had a lot more knowledge in that process. And so then I was with T-Mobile for a long time after that.
Yeah. And you had an interesting hobby, I would say, for lack of a better term, where you would take part in theater. And so tell us more about that.
Yeah, gosh, that journey was interesting. So I joined T-Mobile as an intern. This was in Florida, in Central Florida. And after I finished my master's degree, I was ready to move on for a job. It was a nationwide company. There were opportunities at that time sort of everywhere. And I had a couple of options to move. And I ended up moving from Florida to New York for my first full-time job. And that was an interesting experience as well. Up until that time, I'd never visited New York. So to your point about the first grad students that had come here, I had seen Friends on TV a bunch. So I imagined I was going to a high-rise location and, be surrounded by all these people that you see on TV and stuff like that. I ended up in the middle of Long Island and in a completely remote town, middle of Long Island called Iceland. Right. And so for your listeners, that's like 50 miles, 40 to 50 miles away from New York City. lots of like single-story homes and stuff like that. And so I found myself in a situation that I didn't know anybody, felt completely, not completely isolated, but quite isolated. Yeah. And so I was branching out and looking for things to do. And one of the things that I did was Alter Ego, which is this production company, which is really interesting roots. It was a bunch of people of South Asian descent that had full-time jobs in a variety of industries, engineering, lawyers, people from advertising, etc., that just had a love for theater. And so what they did was they got together, they formed a nonprofit, and they just put up off-Broadway plays. So people are familiar with Broadway plays. There's off-Broadway. Right. These are off-Broadway plays. So the tickets are like $20 piece, and we put up one production every year in the fall. And it would run for about 4 weeks or so, for about a month. And we, as part of the nonprofit, did everything surrounding the show. And we'd get professional directors, professional actors to come do that part of it, professional lighting designers, and so on. Yeah. So it was like a legit process. And we did all the fundraising and the ticketing, the playbill making, etc., the structure to make that happen. It was a great way for people to showcase the talent. We had just such a lot of fun just doing it.
I can imagine. It reminds me of Pen Masala, which is a cappella group out of UPenn. And closer to home, we have Unskilled Immigrants, which is also a nonprofit that does stand-up comedy with the Indian community. I'm hoping to have one of their comedians on this show at some point. Let's go into our first break at this time. And when we return, I want to talk more about your days at T-Mobile and then also your executive MBA program. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this. Mom, we are so high up. Hold my hand.
No, you hold my hand.
Here we go.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
Are you ready to discover remarkable stories of resilience and cultural connection? This is Diasporaa, a show sharing the journeys of first-generation immigrants from the Indian subcontinent now building their lives in North America. Inspiring, insightful, and always engaging, Diasporaa offers a unique perspective on the immigrant experience. Join me, Aditya Mehta, my guests, on the Diasporaa Show every Wednesday at 2 p.m. right here on KKNW.
Wherever you go, Alternative Talk 1150 is here for you.
Welcome back to Diasporaa on KKNW, where we share interesting stories of first-generation immigrants from the Indian subcontinent. We're talking to Ashwin Gonibeed, telecom executive and entrepreneur. Before we get back talking to Ashwin, I want to take a moment to remind you to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. You can find all our episodes in video format there, right from the first one. So you were at T-Mobile for, I think, multiple decades. In our generation, that's not very common anymore, that people stick into a company for so long. What kept you going in T-Mobile for such an extended amount of time, and what were some of the highlights of that journey?
Yeah. So, in the initial phases, I, like everybody else during that time, and even now, kind of went through the H-1B OPT, the F1, H-1B, H-1B process. And so T-Mobile is great about initially sponsoring the green card and so on. So I kind of got into that green card channel and, stick around your job for that time. So that was sort of the practical reason why I initially stayed. But over a period of just a couple of years, I started to form deep friendships with a lot of people at T-Mobile. And it was a really interesting experience. Today, it's a massive company, juggernaut. But at that time, they had just transitioned from being voice stream to T-Mobile, which I don't know if a lot of people remember, but it was a much smaller company company, and it was not almost had a startup-y mentality to it. And then over those next 2 decades, I was there for 22 years. The company went through just so many interesting phases, like massive growth, and then tons of competition in the telecom sector. T-Mobile struggled for a little while. New CEO came in and really supercharged the growth trajectory again to what it is today. And so staying within one company, I had the opportunity of just seeing tons of those growth phases and lots of those experiences around that without having to leave. That was sort of the first experience. The second was T-Mobile, as a company, is just really open to people having sort of multitude of experiences. And so I had the opportunity. I was in engineering for almost about a decade and had the opportunity to kind of climb up the ranks, which is really good. And then that was when I went back to do my executive MBA. And the company was generous about providing me time. My mentor at the time, my manager at that time, was gracious enough to kind of help provide the time and the capability to do that. So I did my MBA part-time, the exec MBA, while I was working full-time. And that was an interesting experience. I think you've done that journey as well. Yeah. And then after that, I got the opportunity over the next 12 years to lead teams in a variety of roles. So I did everything I went from engineering in New York to leading a customer service team in Boise, Idaho, to leading a sales team in LA, to doing business development, procurement, technology strategy. I led teams in all of those areas. And so it felt like it was multiple companies in one company in that same time frame, right? So incredibly grateful for that experience and the people around me that enabled that.
Do you feel you got more value from the MBA because it was an executive program? Or did you have to compromise in certain ways to continue working while you did that?
So, Wharton, when you go into the initiation itself, they tell you this is just as intense as the full-time program, just without the time allocated for it. So buckle up, right? So from an experience and knowledge and standpoint, you don't really miss out on anything. The intensity is a lot more, though. And so what I found was, the impact was more on the people around you and your support system, so to speak. So my manager, who was, like I mentioned earlier, was gracious and instrumental in kind of helping me make that transition, understood that, hey, some evenings and so on, I'd be focused on studying and I'd have exceptions at work. And then my wife, of course, right, my pillar of support at that time. It's funny, I felt guilty for not spending time in social occasions during, because I was evening and weekends were packed in studying for MBA. My wife, who's a total introvert, loved that time. She loved staying at home. And so she didn't know what I was talking about. She's like, what are you talking about? This is great. This works out well for everybody. And so, no, I felt like that experience. And actually, one enhanced the other in a lot of ways, because you could take what you studied in school and kind of figure out if the practical implementation in real time was happening. And bring it back, right? Back and forth.
Yeah. That was definitely an advantage I felt as well. So, my program was executive, but not just in the format. It was a global executive program. So we took classes in London and Dubai mostly, but also in Hong Kong and New York if you wanted to. So the flip side is that not my whole MBA happened in London. So we lost out on that London campus experience and the ability to interact with 30, 40 different streams that are in attendance in any given elective. But because we were a bunch of people coming to Dubai for a whole week, and none of us had anything else going on in Dubai except we were there for the class. So our friendships were a lot stronger than what I saw for the London batch, where everybody would just go home afterwards.
Yeah.
I think almost like 40% of the class came in from places as far away as a 6-hour flight, from Central Asia, from West Africa, from India. So that while we lost out on the campus experience, we gained on the quality of the connections with our peers. And I also felt that because it was the executive program, I was the youngest in my class by a good margin. So I had the most to learn and gain out of everyone's experience. Almost everybody was a CXO. There was nobody there like a full-time program, like trying to figure out what they want to do next, or, go to consulting, go to, management consulting, one of those huge investment banking. It was a very, very wide variety of things that people wanted to do and wanted to get out of the program. We had an ex-astronaut, we had a Kuwaiti billionaire, we had a person who owned a venture capital fund, all sorts of very, very interesting. So overall, I do still think it was a better decision for me in the context of where I was to do the executive program. And like you said, it's just as intense. You're learning the same things. You get the same degree.
And I actually think there's a couple of things to it. So one, in comparison to sort of my master's experience, I think the MBA experience really opened up my mind to be sort of a much broader view of the world, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Because of that, what you just said, that worldwide experience being thrust upon you in the classroom, you don't have a choice, but you can kind of get exposed to it. And you want that experience coming out of that. And I think the second thing that happens, I mean, to your point, Wharton's MBA program is bi-weekly, and it's a residential program from Friday morning to Saturday evening. And so you're forced to spend every other weekend, Friday and Saturday, with your peer, which kind of creates that bond in addition to all of these global experiences. But yeah, a lot of people, because of that broad view experience and seeing how other people navigate their careers from that point onwards, ended up either choosing different things to do post-MBA, stayed in their own role, kind of moved up the ramps, got a broader way to think about their current role, etc. Multiple paths, a lot more diversification paths, I think, at that point.
Yeah, we had what we were called triple jumpers. So they changed their industry, they changed their functional area, and they changed their location. And I was one of those because I went from family stockbroking business in Bombay to having my own tech startup in Canada. So that was kind of the path that I ended up doing. And definitely one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life, most transformational. I always say that these programs are like a buffet and, you pay a price to get in. Some of you have a coupon with like a scholarship, but then it's up to you how much you eat. And if you go hungry, then it's your fault. And I think I stuffed myself every single session there. And that point about like the real-time feedback, right? Because I was setting up my own company, I was actually going to a negotiation class 1 week, going back and changing my pricing strategy and negotiation strategy based on that 1 week of instruction and seeing the real-time impact on my business. So it was very, very powerful. I also felt that the entrepreneurs in the class were more relaxed and than the people who were still working in a company, especially if that company had sponsored the program. They would be, in breaks answering emails, like, trying to squeeze in some work, whereas the entrepreneurs were like more, like, I have control over my time. I'm here. I'm going to pay full attention to this. Did you feel that kind of slight gap between the entrepreneurs in the class and the employees?
I mean, I can see that. I didn't clock on it as much as you did, which is interesting. But I was one of those employees answering emails between breaks, and and the company partially sponsored the MBA and so on.
Yeah.
And so that was there. But I can see this though, right? I think because everybody A, came at a later stage in the career, B, had some kind of an idea of what they wanted to do, there wasn't as much of an intense pressure to kind of go from next thing to the next thing and next thing. People are there to actually discover a lot more. Right. And so there's less pressure on themselves to do it within a certain time frame, I think. Yeah. And so then I think it allowed people to take a wider set of options than they normally would have, which is sort of what I thought, what was happening there. Like in my own case, I didn't change industry, but it was actually the MBA that opened up the pathway for me to get that varied experience over the next 12 years. Yeah. Through a structured program. T-Mobile actually had an executive program that I was a part of. And I was able to get into that program because of the MBA. Post that, I was in engineering for about 10 to 12 years. Yeah. So to your point, like, you're able to take that within the same industry and go to different paths.
Yeah. I believe you also looked at LBS as an option. Tell us more about that. We might have been classmates for all you know and met in 2014 instead of 2025.
My pathway to get in the MBA program was probably a lot harder than for a lot of people. I'd applied in a couple of different rounds prior and was rejected by almost every school that I'd applied to. And my GMAT score, I realized early on, I took a couple of GMATs really quickly, and then my scores was just not very good. So I had to go back and study, and I took it another time. So it was a process. But in the meanwhile, I was still applying, always the optimistic person. So I was applied, I got rejected by almost every other school until I fixed my GMAT. And I did, and I got it. Yeah. And so, there was a point in time when I was just getting rejection letter after rejection letter. And the one that kind of stung the most was LBS's. I think unintentionally, it was nothing personal, but the rejection letter was basically like everybody else says, hey, thank you for applying, incredibly competitive, has no, bearings on what you as a person bring to the table, etc. And then there's FAQs, right? And the FAQs go, should I reapply? And they say, well, you should know we actively pursue people that we would like to reapply, and then it stops. And so the message I got was, thank you, but no, and don't even bother reapplying. Right. And so anyway, it was just, I thought it was funny, or it was just more funny than it was. But yeah, that was...
So I got rejected by, I only applied to NYU when I was living in India. I got rejected by them 3 years in a row. I didn't apply anywhere else. I didn't want to go anywhere else. Then I took a break. I got a degree in real estate finance, a chartered alternative investment analyst designation. And then I said, I'm going to make one last attempt. And I applied to LBS, and my story was the opposite of yours. I decided on June 1, 2014. I took the GMAT on June 9th. I had an interview on June 11th, and I had acceptance on June 21st.
No way.
That was it. But every major thing in my life happens in this way, where I first get a rejection and then I get something which is better than what I had ever imagined. So when I went to Canada, I got rejected in the US first, and then I ended up in Canada, which turned out to be a huge benefit to my later life. My first car, I got, I was going to buy this Honda Civic. It fell through at the last minute. I was disappointed, but then I got a car which I was absolutely in love with. So I think you have some thoughts on these pivotal moments of the life and how they all kind of follow a similar pattern. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is just a little aside. As you were talking about it, it almost feels like our experiences have so many similarities and contrasts as well. Like for me, the contrast was that these things that I wanted to do have been sort of at the back of my mind, percolating, and kind of works with them. And we both faced a ton of rejection. And for me, the process was, well, that's kind of what I wanted to do, and kind of pursued that and so on, right? And I ended up, like you're saying, in a good spot. And yeah, as we were talking about this, I was reminded of Joseph Campbell and his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And so for listeners that don't know, that Joseph Campbell was a mythologist and an author that studied mythology across different parts of the world. And he came up with this theory, this concept of the monomyth, which is every mythology across the world follows the same pattern, which is the hero has a call to action, there's initiation into a journey. And as he starts the journey, he meets a mentor, a friend, somebody that guides him through that journey. He goes through lots of obstacles, ends up meeting his goal or learning from that lesson, and then comes back to a starting point to bring those lessons back to normal life. Now, that could be either he's achieved external riches in the world, or he's got a lot of internal learnings and he's brought that back to the world and he's transformed in that journey. And it was just that book and that concept stayed with me. And what I realized also as just kind of thinking through all of this was that it's not just my experiences, but almost everyone's pivotal experiences in life kind of follows that journey. And it's not that you have one of those journeys. You actually have multiple of those journeys throughout your life. And every pivotal moment follows the same thing. There's some call to action, right? I'd always want to do an MBA. I worked on it for multiple years. Just something that just never went away. And I wanted to do it. There was help along the way, multiple people that supported the journey. Starting with my mentor, my wife, who's been a rock solid support throughout that whole process. And then you kind of come back transformed. And you're able to kind of tell your, help provide that feedback or those lessons to other people, or you're transformed as an individual as well. And, I think of my journey to UCF, a good friend kind of helped me along the way. Think of my first internship, another good friend helped me along the way, and so on. So there's multiple examples in those pivotal journeys throughout life where there's always a call to action, some friend or mentor that helps you along the way, and you come back transformed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm going to include a link to this book in our show notes so that if anyone wants to read it, they know where to find it. After the MBA experience, did you immediately feel like now I want to leave T-Mobile and do something else? Because I know you stayed on for a significant amount of time afterwards, but was there a momentary, I need to do a big reset? I went through that. And in fact, I quit my family business after my orientation. So my reset came even before I started the program. And my dad was like, well, what are you going to do after this? You worked for us for 7 years. I said, I don't know, but I know I don't want to do this. So did you face that sudden, I can be anything I want? Or you just never had to face that?
I did. And I actually interviewed externally at a couple of different companies. And I was looking at a couple of different offers and opportunities. But it was at that time that T-Mobile had this executive rotational program that they were starting out. And so that just from an experiential standpoint was going to give me such a wide variety of experiences in running customer service, sales, and all of these kind of things that I wasn't going to get anywhere else. So the company just turned out to be the best option for my set of experiences at that point. So I ended up staying back, and I was so grateful for having made that choice into the company as well. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. It wasn't, having had that broad experience, going back to doing what you were doing before wasn't fulfilling enough. It's
Yeah.
not judgment, just you wanted
Yeah.
something different and something more.
Yeah, my friend Shashank, who's also been on this show, he's my classmate from London Business School. He explained this in such a beautiful way. He said, earlier, you are a Nokia 3310 and you're in a 2G network. And, the 2G network is fine because all you do with the phone is play Snake on it. But the MBA is like getting a network, is like your phone getting upgraded to like an iPhone. And now the 2G network doesn't suffice. So now you need to go where the 5G network is. So I've kind of held that close to my life for many years now, that concept. And that's what got me to move abroad, do a second stint in North America, because then Bombay wasn't cutting it for me anymore after, getting that stretching of the mind in so many ways. Let's take a... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a telecom professional that deployed 2G, 3G, 4G networks, that example just totally resonates.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think of that. Well, let's go into our second break now. And when we come back, I want to talk about parenting, entrepreneurship, and how you split time between two different sides of the world. So stay tuned, and we'll be back after these messages.
Talking about guns with others might not always feel comfortable, but it could save a life. Here's a way to start a conversation. Your family is going over to your neighbor's home for dinner for the first time. How would you ask if there are any unlocked guns in the home?
Hey, we're so excited for tonight. Before we come over, may I ask a few questions?
Yeah, of course.
Do you have any pets?
Yes, we have a dog.
Great. Do you have a pool outside?
Nope, just a big old backyard.
Nice. Another question. Are there any unlocked guns in the home?
Our guns are stored securely, locked in a safe that the kids can't access.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, let's just talk about what we can bring for dessert.
Learn how to have the conversation at agreetoagree.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Chris Erdman. Every Wednesday at 8 a.m. on KKNW, I sit down with inspiring entrepreneurs, creative minds, and game changers to uncover the real stories behind their business. On my show, Made of More, we explore the challenges that they've overcome, the breakthroughs that they've celebrated, and the mindset that drives them forward. If you're ready to unlock your full entrepreneurial potential, Made of More is the show for you, because here we know you are made of more. Every Wednesday at 8 a.m. on KKNW.
Find out the latest about your favorite shows on Alternative Talk 1150. Check out 1150kknw.com.
Welcome back to Diasporaa on KKNW, where we share interesting stories of first-generation immigrants from South Asia. We're talking to Ashwin Gonibeed, an entrepreneur who shuttles between Bangalore and Seattle. And before we jump back into the conversation, if you like listening to our show, please consider following us on Instagram or leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts. So Ashwin, tell me more about parenting, especially when you spend almost equal amount of time in two different sides of the globe. Probably the two could not be further away from each other. Like it's exactly like halfway across the world. How do you balance that with giving stability to kids and balancing both cultures, which are quite different cultures?
Yeah, it's not been easy, but it's also been so much fun at the same time, right? So slight step back, why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? So about a year and a half ago now, I started the entrepreneur journey. I was one of those people, I was mentioning earlier, this thought at the back of my mind, always wanted to do this, had something like 60 ideas that I'd over the years written up, and finally decided it was time to launch the entrepreneur journey. And so I did about a year and a half ago, kind of left my last job and kind of went down the discovery process, both self-discovery and discovery of what I want to do from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And so as we were going through it, there's a bunch of things that sort of stood out for me. Number one, our kids are really young. They're 5.5 and 2. And so realized, okay, this is a great time for them to get exposure to the Indian subcontinent, the culture and the immersion in all of this place. And time with grandparents. The grandparents are here in Bangalore. In Chennai, and so a great time to do that. 2, I'm a SaaS entrepreneur, so you can run a software company from pretty much any part of the world, and I can kind of commute and travel back and forth. And so, okay, so we're not geographically tethered to this place. I can make that commute. And my wife is going through a transition herself, and she's sort of doing a 2-year program in interior design and so on, which is again another online experience. So I said, okay, we're not geographically tethered. Great time for the kids to have a cultural experience. So why don't we go to India for a few months and kind of check it out? And we've been here for a few months now, and it's been a great set of experiences for the kids, and really interesting parallels and contrasts between the two sides of the world. And so here we are. We're trying it out for all of those reasons. And let's face it, cost of living in India is just, as you're building a startup, and you see, looking at the burn rate and cash flow and stuff like that, that's a huge bonus as well. And so there's a variety of reasons to kind of do that. But that was sort of a thought process as we kind of went through.
Yeah, for me, I call it a mental block maybe, but for me, the quality of life in India just doesn't match up to the quality, and that's different from standard of living. You can have standard of living in both places. I certainly had it in India with, my family's well-established business family, etc. But I just wasn't getting quality of life, and that's literally the only, because now I see the scale that India has, which wasn't even there 10 years ago. I can see how dynamic it is and all the amazing things that are going on. And the opportunities are once in a generation right now. But I just can't bring myself to get over this quality of life hurdle. Be it, the air quality, the traffic, the lack of outdoor spaces, all of those things. And of course, it matters a lot more to me than it may matter to someone else. So there is no right or wrong to it. But we've tried to get my son as much time in India as possible, and grandparents coming here and all of those as kind of, an in-between. We always have thought that maybe in the medium term, we would move to a place like Dubai, which has best of both. And then you can kind of straddle both parts of the world and get, when it's gloomy and dark here, you go to Dubai. And then when it's crazy hot there, you come back here. Something like that. Hopefully we'll do that. Tell me more about Terra Casa and how you arrived upon that as a business model, and how the journey has been so far.
Yeah. It's super new in its founding stages. And we've got some versions of sort of initial versions of product market fit, but we're not fully there yet. So we're still kind of in the building process. But going back to like a year and a half ago, at that point in my career where it was sort of the now or never kind of scenario, right? And so like, all right, I either need to stop thinking about entrepreneurship or dive in and do something. So I decided to dive in and do something. And the first 2-3 months was actually just discovery, self-discovery, and sort of what problems I really want to spend my time tackling and so on.
Yeah.
And we had a personal experience at that time that kind of led me down this path. As a homeowner, we were trying to find, plumbers, electricians, general contractors, and so on to help us with
story of my life as a property manager.
As property manager, right? And so I was like, why is this so difficult? And personally, we had a couple of things happen at home that we needed to get fixed right away. It was an emergency, so like emotionally it was taxing, and it was so that kind of stood out as a moment. So this is harder than it needs to be. And so we kind of went down that discovery path of saying, okay, maybe there's a consumer side option to this and so on. But as a consequence of that discovery process, I ended up talking to a lot of plumbers, electricians, and so on, saying, why do you not stay in touch with your current customers? Like one of the current problems that people have, certainly in SMBs and in the home services business, is they're constantly chasing new leads. So a new customer comes in, service them, do a great job, and then they don't do a great job of staying and engaging with those customers over a period of time. Because it's difficult to do. Like, what messages do you send out? How do you send it? And so on. And so what we discovered was a lot of people that just use MailChimp as a standard sort of email marketing process. And you're like, okay, there's got to be a better way of doing that. You stay in touch with the customers, provide them value, they come back, and for customers such as myself, it adds value. So that's how the Terra Casa journey started. And much like the story arc of having your mentor, your guide, your friend along the way, a good friend of mine at that time, Scott, my co-founder now, and is part of the journey with us. He and I ended up having coffee some 2-3 months into the journey. He found himself in a similar place. And we just started discussing, brainstorming. And like, okay, let's kind of go down this discovery path. And so that's how Terra Casa started. And we're about, from the point of starting the discovery phase to like figuring out, okay, this is where we want to start. This is the initial things we want to build out, etc. We're about 8 months in. We launched an MVP, got some good feedback from people the users that have been trying the MVP. No, we need to do a bunch of edits. So kind of going back and working with the user base to refine it so it adds a lot more value to their life. But that's kind of been the journey, how we started where we are now.
Yeah, and it's tradespeople are one of these businesses that won't be replaced by AI anytime soon. So it's good to be supporting that activity where the AI actually gives an edge to the business. That was one of my considerations when deciding to get into property management is, I didn't want to have a business that would be replaced by AI in the next 2, 3, 5 years. Yeah, I also had a SaaS startup, but it's not what you think. When I was in college, there were no good hookah parlors around college. So I had a little subscription service for students. And, I would invite them to my apartment X number of times every semester for a flat fee. So it was the world's first SaaS startup, shisha as a service and not software as a service. So it's a good story to tell in like these entrepreneur forums and whatnot. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about BNI because we met in through a BNI chapter. And for those who don't know, it's Business Networking International. It's a kind of unique networking organization with chapters all over the world where every chapter only has one person from one profession. So I'm the only property manager in my chapter. We have one plumber. We have lots of tradespeople represented. We have lots of service providers like CPAs and lawyers. How has your experience been with BNI? Because yours is not what a conventional, BNI member would be, like, someone founding a SaaS startup. And I can see the angles, but what was your motivation to join BNI and how has it panned out based on that, the assumptions that you had when you joined?
Yeah. Yeah, I got introduced to BNI through one of the tradespeople I was talking to. And he was a member of BNI, so he wasn't a member, he'd actually gone to a couple of BNI meetings and said, hey, this is a nice network for you to be a part of. And so I came for a couple of meetings and really enjoyed meeting a lot of people there and so on. And, the honest answer is you're right. BNI isn't exactly set up for a SaaS startup, certainly in the discovery phases of PMF, where we are and so on. But I joined BNI and I've stayed for the relationships. And so to your point, I think there's a lot of things that come out of it. One is the unexpected introductions and relationships that you form, such as ourselves. We met through BNI and this wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for BNI. One. Two, I think you learn so much from listening to other people on the call. And so the tons of tradespeople in BNI from whom I'm constantly meeting and learning and kind of refining the product market fit, even if they're not necessarily users, from how they approach business, how they approach their things, something like that. And three, I think BNI has a structure, sort of a rhythm to every meeting every week that forces you to do things that don't naturally come to you, right? And so I think that structure is going to help me think about the business and how I approach things that I do as well in a slightly different way. So I think I've got a lot of it.
I had joined because obviously clients being an end goal, I also wanted access to tradespeople because I need a lot of them for my work. I also wanted to have a support system of other entrepreneurs who had been entrepreneurs in this market for a longer time. Because, the Indian community, especially in Seattle, is heavier towards people who have jobs versus business people. So it gets lonely, as you know, as an entrepreneur. And then also I wanted to have friends in my local area who were beyond just the Indian community. We have lots of Indian friends and they're my, core support network. But I've developed some really interesting relationships. The other day I had a small gathering at my house. There was a podcast producer, energy healer, a professional organizer, office manager of a dentist office, a leadership coach, and a property manager. And I was like, very few forums give you the ability to meet such diverse people. And so for me, and again, BNI, just like the MBA, it's a buffet. So how many other chapters you visit, how many people you meet, how much you talk about your business. And, it's farming, it's not hunting. You can't go in there and expect to get leads the next day. But it's been quite fulfilling and productive once, we got the hang of it. And there's members who have been around for 15 and 20 years. And I'm like, man, that's some discipline to do this every single week in and week out for so many years. It does definitely ground your schedule or anchor your schedule in one spot. And I happen to just really love my chapter. It's an amazing group of people. It's one of the leading chapters in Washington State. So it turned out pretty well. So when you do come back to Seattle next, you should come to my chapter and do an in-person and you'll see the energy. So this is your second stint in Bangalore. One was when you were very young. How has the city changed since the first innings?
dramatically, right? Bangalore is the garden city, as it was called. Tons of leafy boulevards, wide roads.
Yeah.
Pace of life was just very different, and so on. And all of that's dramatically changed. The traffic, so on and so forth. Right, the things that you mentioned about quality of life earlier. And yet at the same time, it's also changed in so many different ways. The ease of life of living here is just like, 5-minute deliveries and so on. It's just like, it's amazing to see that transformation happen as well. And so it's changed in just some completely profound ways. But I think the most interesting for me has been the variety of pan-India experiences that you now get in Bangalore itself. Right, so there's Betaks in Bangalore, which I didn't have like 20, 25 years ago. It's a lot more Kannada, Kannadiga centric than it is today. And so that, I think, is a wonderful experience to be able to get and to be able to provide the kids as well as they're here. A bit of contrast, I think the biggest contrast.
Nice. Well, let's go into our weekly segments now. Why don't we spin the wheel and see what we land on? So this one's our crowd favorite, and it's called Mango Memories. Most people from our part of the world have a mango memory that they're proud of. So do you have one that you'd like to share?
Yeah, gosh, mango memories. Mangoes in South India. It was always an argument in our house as to what variety of mango to get.
Of course.
Right? Like, and there was never any clear winner. And there was always some kind of critique about the mango once it did arrive. And it was almost like a study plan, I think, sometimes when you got.
Yeah.
And I also realized people, certainly now than they were at that point, have their own like mango retailer, and that person that delivers a box of mangoes, and they're incredibly protective about that. And that's who they go to and so on. So it's like, it's a whole thing during the summer. As we understand here. But what's been fun for me actually is, we've stayed here during the summer, and my kids that are 5 and 2 now have had the opportunity to experience all of that. And they've eaten more mango this summer than they have in the previous 5 years, 2 years of their life. And certainly for us as well, mangoes are expensive in the US. So we've had a chance to re-experience that intensity of the mango season here. So it's been great to see that sort of
come up full circle. Oh, great. Thank you for sharing that. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for listening to Diaspora, and we hope you enjoyed hearing Ashwin's interesting story. Remember to check out our show notes for links and more information about the topics we talked about today. Diaspora is part of the Speaking Current network of shows and podcasts, all of which are dedicated to inspiring listeners to build lives of meaning, connection, and value. You can find the Speaking Current network of shows wherever you get your podcasts, and also on YouTube. Lastly, if you know someone who has a story that can be shared on our show, please feel free to reach out to us on any of our social media handles. We'll be back next week with another interesting story from the South Asian diaspora. Until then, take care and stay curious. And Ashwin, thank you so much for joining us today.